Hey guys, welcome to MMP Music Mentorship Program. I'm going to show you some basically more intermediate to advanced techniques in mixing setup. I'm not going to actually go through plugins and sound and mixing. It's more just explaining how I export from one DAW to another, or how you can export from one DAW to the same DAW. However, instead of kind of mixing with a bunch of stuff that like virtual instruments and all this that's loaded onto your computer, you're basically getting a fresh start and exporting for yourself and re-importing into more of a mix template. So that's what I do, and I took notes here on what happens when I basically export from Cubase. I'm going to export all of the tracks. They're all of the individual tracks, right? So when that happens, I'm also leaving the effects on them. Like, the lead vocal has a compressor on it. I like the way it sounds. Okay, leave it on there. It has reverb on it. Leave it on there. So I'm rendering all of those. I even rendering all of the reverb sends and stuff like that. I also, at the same time, am rendering the stems. So for example, when I have like my kick, snare, hi-hat, and that all goes into, all of these other like drums, they go into a bus called percussion. I render that percussion bus. I render the synth bus that might have 25 different synths going into it. They're called stems, and that's helpful for me for several reasons. One is to kind of recreate a mix. The other is to possibly just mix stems. And the third reason is because in the end, a lot of sync licensing companies, they want stems as well. So when I export that mix, I make sure I have a rough mix as well, which is a stereo bounce, and I have a rough limited mix. That means that it's gone through a limiter, and that's what I've been hearing when I'm trying to evaluate, is the song done? Okay, so after that's done, what I do is I do another render, completely different one, tracks with no effects and no levels. And the reason why I do this, I will show you, is because say I'm mixing over here and I have my imported this kind of import right here, these things, which is the tracks with the effects levels. Well, the advantage of that is great because as soon as I've imported my mix, it sounds like my rough mix, right? Because I've imported it with all the levels and everything. So if, my hi-hat was all turned like almost all the way down, well, the audio is going to actually show a waveform that has the hi-hat turned way down. So that's great if I'm not going to get into the mixing and I more just kind of want to start where I left off. But it's not great if I want to get into that hi-hat and do something to it, like compress it or whatever. So this is what I do. I actually print two different versions for each. So for example, if you look at this, whatever you call it, Dr. Clack, it looks like I mixed with the version that was had the automation or the volume written into it. But if I go under here, check this out. Bam. Actually, you can't even see it very well. Let's if I click on it like that, you see how tiny those are? That's because they're not as loud, but these over here are the ones where the levels are higher and they're basically they're normalized. So if I really want to get into it and mix, that individual channel, that's the version I'll go to. So basically I've imported all of these two versions of every single track. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it to me because I can pull up the mix really quickly. Another way I can pull up the mix really quickly and kind of start where I left off is this. So if I close this folder here, everything in orange, these are the stems. So this is not a folder, this is an actual audio file of all the percussion. In this case, I did two percussion stems. For some reason, it's separated into two. But basically, what that means is I can mute all of these colored ones that are not orange. And these are the individual files, and I can just mix the stems. So as soon as I bring this mix up and I unmute just the stems, then my mix sounds exactly like I left off. And then I can choose between mixing these stems here or getting into each individual track. So what's really cool about that is when I'm mixing, I can A/B, like I can work on all these individual tracks and, tweak things, compress things. But then I'm like, well, does it sound better or worse? Because a lot of times when I'm mixing, I hate to say this, I'm making it sound worse than it did in the rough because I did something magical in the rough. So if I want to compare the two, all I have to do this, like let's, for example, solo all of the percussion tracks, okay? So this one right here is the percussion folder that contains all the individual percussion tracks. These two are just the stems, the percussion stems. So what I want to do, if I want to do a blind test between the two, I mute this one here. I mark all of them. And then I'm going to go Shift M. And it's going to switch back and forth between the two. So let's hear it. So you can clearly see that I beat myself, right? Like these orange tracks were what they sounded like when I was doing the rough mix, but I beefed this one up. And you can tell that, I won. I beat the other guy, which was me, of course. But sometimes I beat myself the other way around, and the rough mix sounds better. So it's really important to me that I can go back and forth between those. So another thing I want to show you is how I set up, for example, like see how there's all these sends here. This one's called Nice Pair. That's an actual hardware unit. If I go over to my effects section, these are already in my template. I did not make each one of these when I was setting up my mix. These were already in my template. So as soon as I imported the tracks, if I was like, hey, I want to put a convolution reverb on my drums. Well, D-Convo is convolution reverb, and that's Ocean, in this case, Ocean Way, is already set up, ready to go. So when I'm mixing and I'm like, man, that drum sounds super good, but it needs a little more room. Well, all I have to do is type in D-Convo, and there it is. I hit it. And there's my level, pump it in. Okay, so once it's pumped in, now I'm ready to go. I didn't have to like create a track and then do all these crazy things. So the cool thing about this as well is if you look over here, all those effects tracks that I just referred to, whoops, let's get back. Okay, there they are. These are my drum effects tracks. Look, they're already bussed. See all of these these are all my drum effects. I don't have to sit there and route them and stuff like that. They're already bussed to this folder, okay? Then this folder that says percussion low, which for me is just in general percussion, is going to another set of buses called aux. So let's go over there. Let me just close this folder so you guys can see a little bit better. Okay, so check it out. Here is my aux channel setups. These are basically stems again that all of my tracks are going into, so that when I render, I can render these stems and send those to the sync licensing company that's like, no, we really want like a percussion, we really want a brass like track. Synth track, piano bells, harp track, guitar track, all these things. They're already set up. They're ready to go. I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is say like, hey, these are the tracks, pump it in. There's my percussion low. So now everything is going from these auxiliary channels into my music in. In the tutorial, I think I called it mix bus. And then they go from there to my limiter and then to my recording tracks. So that's super awesome to have it set up. Another example of that is my lead vocal track is already pumped into lead vocals auxiliary, which in this case I call it LVox. I do a lot of multing with my lead vocals. For example, here's the dry channel. The dry channel is pumping through two hardware units, LA2A and a distressor. And then after they go through these two units, they sum again into this lead vocal verse sum, which I can do all the treatment, limiting, whatever I want to, de-essing. And then from the lead vocal sum, that goes into my main lead vocal, which then goes into the auxiliary channel way back over here. So it seems complicated, but it's totally necessary for me because I want the control later on, especially between the verses and the choruses. Here's the same thing. Here's the dry channel going through another distressor in LA2A, and then the sum is called the lead chorus sum, right? And then that sum is going to the lead vocal sum over here again. So now when I want to control my lead vocal, I don't have to go like, oh, which one is that? Is that the verse in the chorus or the chorus? I can just move this up and down. The other place I can move up and down when I'm ready to mix, kind of more massaging, like general different sections with different, oh yeah, I just want all the percussion to come up. Or I want all the vocals, the background vocals to come up. I can actually automate these over here. So the other cool thing is I can come over here, and let me turn off trim so you can actually see what's going on. I have all of these auxiliary channels already set up to kind of a master VCA. So when I do this, I can turn those up and down instead of going to my master fader. And manipulating the volume there. There's a couple reasons why I want to do that. One is because all of these are going into a compressor, and I don't want to do a volume fader post compressor. I want to do it pre-compressor. The other reason is when I'm totally done and I'm ready to send these to sync companies, if I want to have the stems, I want the automation of the volumes written into the stems as well. So, another thing to remind you is that whenever I have effects, I don't just make like one reverb that like the vocals and the synths and the drums can go into, because what would I do? How would I make stems that way? I would have to mute the reverb, that the vocals going into, because I don't want it to go into the drums. So I literally have, you can see in this bottom row, I have a reverb for every basic stem. So these are my winds reverbs. These are my brass reverbs. This is all my drum reverbs. These are all my guitar reverbs. They're set up, ready to go. I don't have to go in and pick a reverb. I mean, I do pick a reverb, but they're already ready for me to try out. I don't need to actually like pull up the plugins. Here's my piano bells, harp reverbs, instrument reverbs over here, a synth reverb, a pad reverb, effects reverb. That means like special sounds and kind of weird things. I have 3 string reverbs, and then I go nuts for my lead vocal, of course. I've got like more of a bigger reverb, a smaller one, or a clear ambience reverb, a spring, high fidelity reverb, Valhalla reverb. I have a folder with all my different delays. This is just for my lead vocal. All of these are already set up, a slap, a spreader. Let's see. Yeah, just different styles of kind of more vintagey type reverbs. And then I have my BV effects. That means background vocals effects. So each of those have a bunch of reverbs too. See how they're all routed though, of course, into their individual sections. So I have a lot of control over it because, like, for example, say my background vocals are all building up with like these really cool verbs, and I'm like, I like it, but man, it's getting muddy. Well, normally you'd have to go in and like try and EQ that individual like background vocal and like maybe tweak the reverb. And yeah, that sometimes is necessary, but sometimes when I'm just like, man, I just want to go over to my auxiliary channel here and I want to insert like a multiband compressor. Look, I've already done that. Yep, there's that frequency that builds up with those background vocals. So I just added a multiband compressor or an EQ or whatever I want to add to that entire stem of background vocals, because that's going to affect everything. If the reverb's building up, maybe that's the problem, you know? So I don't want to EQ the actual dry vocal. I want to EQ the entire stem with the reverb that's being sent into that. So there are really tons of applications for that. I won't go through these plugins, but like I'll go through generally what I do. There's a low or a high pass. I use there's some tape. I have two different tapes. I got a compressor. I've got like a black box. It's a distortion unit, but it's not really distortion. It's more like generating harmonics. I have several compressors on here. I'll go through that on a different time, but basically like all of my stuff's loaded up, and then a lot of times these are off, and I'll just leave them off unless they sound better. And then here's my limiter channel as well. In this case, I've got two limiters. Crazy. So hope this helps. I know it seems kind of complex, just trying to give you guys some ideas if you're more working towards an advanced setup. And really the goal in this case is I want to be able to pick up where I left off. So I want to start over, but I don't want to start completely over. I want to be able to work from something that sounds like my rough and then be able to tweak it. So good luck, guys. Hope you enjoy it.